So we're going to resume with lesson 8. We've been working on configuring Passport local. So now we want to add register and login views and controller methods to see if we can actually use Passport to first create accounts and then log in. So in terms of the views, I've actually posted the HTML that we need up on Blackboard. So here's register.hbs, here's login.hbs. So I'm going to copy the HTML. I'm going to create these two files. So in lesson 8, I'm just going to copy all the HTML first in the register.hbs. And then I'll go to our project, and inside of views, just right in the root of views, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create a new file called register.hbs. And then I'm going to paste in all of the HTML that I copied from Blackboard. So this just sets out a form. I've used a regular expression to require a strong password, so minimum 8 characters with at least 1 digit, 1 lowercase, 1 uppercase. I haven't required special characters. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to go and do the exact same thing. I'm going to create login.hbs, and I will copy and paste the HTML for that form as well. It's just plain HTML. There's no node code. There's no JavaScript here. So I'm going to make one other new file. I will call it login.hbs. And I'll jump back to Blackboard. I'll just copy the HTML here, paste it in as well. If you need any of the Passport configuration code that we did in the first hour of class, I have pushed that to GitHub, where you can reference it. So I'm going to go back to the browser. Now, our register and login links, right now, these aren't active. In our layout file, our navbar, when we click them, they don't go anywhere. So let's enable these links, and then we can add some root handlers in the controller so that when we click register or login, it renders the appropriate view. So we're going to need to go under views. We've got to open up our layout file. Our layout file that came with the project, it contains we added our Bootstrap navigation bar back about a month ago. And for me, here's the section starting from line 41 down to line 46. Here are the register and login links, and you'll notice they just go to star. So I'm going to change these href properties on the register and login links. I'm going to take out the number sign, and I'll set the path to be /register and /login. So we're going to change the links to /register and /login. Okay, so I've modified lines 42 and 45. And now if I click on register, my link is active. It goes to the right URL, but we get a 404 not found. If I click login, same issue, 404 not found. So this behavior is actually to be expected. Why is it happening? We have these views. Yeah, that's right. We haven't mapped those paths, as Jason and Adam said. So Express is not smart enough to know which view is supposed to be loaded. So we need a get handler in our controller for this URL and this one. So we can go to our index controller. Right now we've got two routers, two handlers here, one for the root path, one for /about. So first let's add get /register. So when we have a request and the URL is /register, we'll use our usual request response callback. And we are going to render the register view. And we'll pass in a title. It just says register. So we'll add this first root handler. And once we save our change, our register link should hopefully work. I'll go ahead and try it out in a minute. I think it's time to get out of my chair. Magic standing desk. There we go. So I'll go back to the browser. I'll try my register link again. This time it should load our form. Okay, so now we get our register form. We're going to need a very similar get handler for login. So when we click the login link, it renders the new login view we just created. Get for login as well. So we have a get request at /login. This time we're going to render the login view. And our title can say login. So now we should be able to load either page. So now I click login. We get our almost identical form, only difference obviously, the register form has a confirm box, and we've got different title and different text on our button. Other than that, they look pretty much the same. So we haven't really used Passport yet. We've configured it, but we haven't really done anything with it. We had to do all that configuration. We needed to build these two forms. Now we can actually try to use Passport. So there's three things we want to do with Passport. Number one, we want to be able to create new users when we post the register form. Number two, we want to allow users to authenticate, log in, and have their identity stored in the session object as they move through the site. And then number three is we'll want to be able to control access. So for example, these links to add or edit or delete, those are going to be unavailable unless somebody is logged into the site. So an anonymous user, they're just going to simply see the artist names with no ability to add, edit, or delete. But before we can do that, we need to be able to create accounts and log in. So our next step in this is writing first the post handler for our register form. So we can create users using Passport. Then we're going to write a post handler for the login form. And then we can add our authentication checking around the artist management. So you go back to the controller, and underneath my get register method, we now need a post method handler. So what happens when someone completes the form and submits it? So in this case, we're going to use router.post at the same URL at /register. So again, we'll have our request and response parameters. So we're going to need to use both the user model that we created in the first hour of class, as well as we're going to need to use Passport. So before we can do that, we're going to need to make a few new references up at the top of our controller. So we're going to reference Passport. And we're going to reference the user model. So we've got to do // to go up out of the controllers folder and then back down into the models folder. Okay, so we need both of these references on lines 5 and 6. We're going to need them for both the register method and the login method, and then we're going to need them later on inside of our artist controller as well. So add the links, the references to Passport into our user model, into our index controller. We're going to need to reference both of these in here. So what happens in the register method? We're going to use the user model, Passport, to create a new user in Mongodb. We also send the password separately so it can be hashed by Passport. So our user method, our user object is going to have a register method. We're going to create a new user. Well, our username comes from our request.body.username. The password comes from request.body.password. And our third parameter is a callback. We will either get back an error or a new user. One of these two things is going to come back when we call the register method. If we get an error, we'll do what we usually do. We will log it. In this case, we will reload the register page, and we'll provide a message here. So if for some reason something happens, like for example, Passport is going to check that that username doesn't already exist, for example. If the username exists, we're going to have an error that we can display back on the register page. Otherwise, in this case, registration succeeded. And we're going to log the user in and load the main artists page. So we'll automatically log them in and take them off to show the list of artists. So in this case, we call request.login. So this is built into Passport. We will log the new user in. And we'll call res.redirect to the artist's controller. So somebody doesn't have to register and then log in. When we register, we're automatically logging them in once their account gets created in MongoDB. So let's try this out. I know WebStorm's not recognizing the register method. And you may say, well, where is this register method, right? When we go and look at our user model, there's no method defined here. The register method is in Passport local mongoose. So our model extends this package. The register method should be in here. We can actually see so there is a register method here in our Passport local mongoose. So that's what we're calling. Okay, so let's go and try this out. And you go to register. Easiest thing is if we all use the same format here. So I'll just call it user@gc.ca. And our password has to have the 8 characters with at least a lowercase, an uppercase, and a digit. So I'll make my password test1234 with a capital T. I'll put these credentials in the chat as well. That way, if we all create the same account, no one has to really worry about remembering the login. So let's make it user@gc.ca, password test1234. We'll try it out. We'll see what happens. So when I register, it's automatically taken me to the artists. So that's a good sign that our registration worked. Now, how do we know? There's not really any clue. So let's go and look in our MongoDB, and there should now be a users collection that gets created automatically, and there should be one document, one user account in there with username user@gc.ca. So if we want to check, I can go to MongoDB Compass. I could also go to the MongoDB website. I'll show you there. So here's my database cluster. Excuse me, I'm going to connect to it. Here's my NodeDB. Here's the database that I'm working with. And now notice I have a users collection. Well, this wasn't here before. So one of the cool things about a NoSQL database, if we create a document and that collection doesn't exist, it just builds the collection on the fly. So we don't have to set up a users collection first. And it says there's one document. So if I click on my users collection, here is my new user account. My username is user@gc.ca, and it has salted and hashed the password. So the salting helps ensure that the hash value is unique. Now, I think most of you installed MongoDB Compass. If you didn't, we can also look at the database through the MongoDB website. I'll show you how to check your database there as well. So I will go to MongoDB and sign in. And here's my cluster 0. And if I click on my collection, here's my node DB. And if I click on users, we can see I have a user collection with one document here as well. So our registration is working. We're able to use our user model and passport local mongoose to create a new user account with a hashed password. So again, here was our code. I'll put the code back up in our register post method. In fact, I will push this up to GitHub now as well. So if anybody needs to reference anything here, you have easy access to it. So we've referenced passport and our user model and our index controller, and we've used those two. We've used our user model, which extends passport local mongoose, to register to create a new user and log them in. I'll push to Git now. So there's our registration working. So now we also need to add a post handler or logins. I can register, but right now, if I fill out my form and click login, we're going to get a 404 error because there's no post handler for login attempts. So we also need a small post handler in here. Once we have that working, we're also going to add some logic that we can maybe toggle our navigation bar. Once somebody logs in, we want register and login to disappear, kind of like in our ASP.NET MVC template. And we want to show their username and logout instead. Then we can also maybe park those links over here on the right. So from looking at the navigation bar, we can instantly tell if the user is logged in or if they're anonymous. We'll also need to enable the logout functionality. That'll be pretty similar, pretty simple to do. So we'll go back to our index controller. And underneath my login get method, we now want to write a post method at the same URL. So our path is login. Now the callback structure is a little bit different here. We're not going to use the regular request response callback. Instead, when a user submits the login form and posts it, we're just automatically going to make a call to Passport. So we're going to call passport.authenticate. And we have to supply a couple parameters here. The first one is, what strategy are we using? Are we trying a Google login, a Facebook login? In our case, we are trying a local strategy. So Passport should check this user account in our local database. And then after the strategy, we have to supply a few options. Passport wants to know if the authentication is successful, where do we take the user? We're going to set a success redirect to /artists. So if someone logs in, take them to the list of artists. if the login fails, we also need to set up a failure redirect. Where do we typically take users? They have a login screen, they fill out the login form, they click login. If their login doesn't work, where do we want them to go? Right. So in that case, we call the get method and we redirect them back here. Thank you, Adam. So this is all we have to do is call passport authenticate and pass in the strategy and set up the success and failure pathways. We don't actually have to map the username from the form to the username in the user model. We don't have to map the password and hash it. This passport authenticate, it kind of does it all automatically, which I know Jillian will love. Passport.authenticate does all the work behind the scenes to validate a login attempt. Right? Pretty simple. Just call passport authenticate, tell it which login strategy, authentication strategy we're using, and set up paths for success and failure. That's it. So now I should be able to go and try this again. And I'm going to try both an invalid login, and then I'll try a valid login. When my login is invalid, I should stay on the login screen. If the login is valid, I should get taken off to the artist page. So I'll leave this code up for a minute, allow you to catch up. We'll try it out. Then we can deal with our navigation bar. We can deal with logging out. We can deal with also displaying login error messages. So if someone doesn't log in, we want to can't log in successfully. We want to show them login screen, but we should also show them a message so that they're not wondering, why am I still on the login screen? Go try it out. So first I'm going to put in a bad login. I'll try here. This account doesn't exist. There is no rich@gc.ca here, right? The only valid username is user@gc.ca. So if I try it, if I click, right, it just keeps me here. Form submits, which is good, but I'm not logged in. So now what if I try user@gc.ca? Okay, cool. Well, now I'm authenticated, right? Because instead of being kept on the login screen, it's brought me here to the artist page. So passport.authenticated does all the heavy lifting for us. Now, from a user experience, obviously, we need to do a little more here. If I put in a login that isn't valid, like this one, it just keeps me here, but there's no message. I should get some kind of message telling me the login was invalid. So in this case, we've got to do a couple things in order to make that happen. First, we can also set up in the post method, we can set up a failure message and stick it in the session variable. So when the page reloads and redirects, we can then check for an error message and print it out at the top of our login form. So I'm going to add one more parameter here, which is a failure message. And just say invalid login. And this is stored in a session, in the session object. So if the login is no good, we want to create an error message that we can then display when our form reloads. we're going to add this last parameter here into our post method. We're now going to need to add some logic into the get. So when the login screen loads, we want to check, was there an error message in the session object? If there is, we need to display that error to the login. So we're going to need to rewrite some logic here. And then we're going to need to add a little bit of HTML into the view. So if it reloads and there's an error, we can display that error to the user. So before we call res.render, we are going to check the session for error messages. So let messages So we're going to set it equal to request.session.messages or an empty array. We're then going to clear the session messages. And then when we render our view, we're going to pass in this local messages variable. We're going to add something here. We've got our title of login, and now we also have messages, which equals our messages array. So if we've got an invalid login attempt, when we load the page, we now have a login message, an invalid message we can show to the user. So we're taking our session object, we're storing it in a local variable, and then we're clearing out the session object. And then we're going to pass those errors, if there are any, we're going to pass them to the view. So now we need a little bit of logic in our view, our login view, at the top so we can display. So I'm going to go back to login. And underneath, between my H1 and my form, we'll write a little if statement. We'll say if we have any messages. And then if we don't, so if we have messages, we want to print them out in red. So I use Bootstrap's alert and alert danger class. And we'll just print out, we'll just hard code the message. The login is invalid. Otherwise, we can maybe print in blue message that says something like, please enter your credentials. So users will see either an invalid login message in red or a please enter your credentials message in blue. I'm going to ignore WebStorm doesn't recognize my HPS syntax. That's okay. So let's see what happens. So I go to login now. What's going on? It doesn't like this. What have I missed? Bear with me for just a sec. We'll sort it out. Let's look here. I don't think my spacing should matter, but we'll see. Maybe it does. My red underlines go away when I take out those spaces inside my curly braces. Oh, I guess it does matter. Okay, I thought my code was a little more readable with spaces inside my handlebars tags. I guess not. So if there are no errors, we see this blue div. Please enter your credentials. But if I enter an invalid login, we now have some messages. So it says invalid. Good catch, Jason. Thank you. So now we can also deal with our navigation bar. First of all, I want to put register and login over here. And then I want to add some logic that says when someone is logged in, instead of showing register and login, I want to show their username and log out. And then we can also build a simple logout method to sign somebody out. So I'm going to go and go back to our layout file. We've already enabled these links. So I'm going to put these inside of a separate list. So we've got about and artist as our first list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that first list after the artist link. And I'm going to put these in a separate list. I want to right align the register and login links. So I'm going to use navbar nav, the same classes. Then I'm going to use ML auto. So now instead of one list with 4 links, I've got 2 separate lists. The first list contains the about an artist link. It's left aligned. The second list has that same navbar nav class, but it also has this ML auto, which should right justify register and login. So first we're going to move those links off to the right. Then we can add some logic about whether these links show or we've got other links showing. And probably help if I save my file. Let me inspect. Let's just see. I do have ML auto. So why is that not right justified? Just have a quick check on Bootstrap. Let's see if I can find a quick example that will put my text off on the right. If I can't find it for right now, let's see, navbar text with an inline element. I'll try one other class, and if not, I'll leave it for now. Try navbar text. I'll see if that right aligns it. No. Okay. Our links will have to stay where they are for now. That's okay. I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'll fix it up later. So now what we also want to do, though, is toggle these links. When someone is not logged in, they see these. When someone is logged in, they don't. So I'm going to tab those over and indent them, because these links I'm going to nest inside of an if statement. We're going to say if we have a user, I'm going to move these inside of my else. If there is no active user, if the user object is null, I'm going to drag those in here. If we do have a user, we want to show different links. So I'll create 2 more list item tags. The first one won't actually go anywhere, but we want to just display the username. So when we're logged in, our email address shows up in the navigation bar. The second link will allow us to log out. We'll have to build this. It'll say log out. So on every page, our layout is going to be checking for a user object. If we have a user object, it's not null, there is a user in the session, show the username and log out. If there's no user object, we're going to show register and log in. So in order to get this to work, we're going to have to make some changes in our 2 controllers. We're going to have to make sure that every time we load a view, we are also passing the user object, because our navbar is going to be checking for it. So if we go back right now to my browser, we're still not going to see, we're never going to see these 2 links. It's always going to say register and log in, even if we're authenticated. We'll go back to the browser in a minute and try it out. I can just shrink it down. So I'm going to log in. I'm logged in, but it doesn't show my username, doesn't show logout. So in all of our methods, all our get methods where we return a view, we also now need to include the user object. So what does that look like? Well, let's go first back to our index controller. We've got a number of get methods. So here on the home page, we're passing in a title, but now we also need to pass in a user object. And we get this with our request.user. We're going to do the same thing with about. We're going to pass request.user. Whoops, sorry. This is going to be our user. is equal to our request.user. So if I log in now and go to the home page or the about page, I should see my username and log out in the navigation bar. We'll then need to add this into our artists controller as well. Okay, so in our index, when we're getting the home page or about, we're passing the user object as well. See how this works. I'm going to go back to log in again. We haven't changed the artists, but if I click on the home page, now it shows my username and log out. If I go to about, so we need to that same little logic, we need to pass the user object to the artists when we're adding or editing as well. So we're going to go add that little block of code to those three get methods in the artist controller. So I'm going to go to my controllers, artists. We're almost done for today. Bear with me. So in the get method, when we call res.render, we're also going to need passport. Passport for auth. We're going to require passport. And then in our res.render statement, we can also again pass in our request.user object to all three of the get methods. We have our get artists, our get artists create, and our get artists edit. So I'm going to pass it in on all of these. Request.user here. When we are loading our form to create a new artist. And also when we're calling router.get to, not for delete, but to edit an artist. So anywhere we've got a res.render statement, we are going to pass in our request.user object. So now once I log in, anywhere I go in the site, my nav bar should show my email address and log out. We can deal with log out when we come back. So I'll try this again. I'll log in. And now it automatically shows me, no matter where I go, my nav bar shows, it indicates that I'm logged into the site. You can edit. This will show so long as my session is active. Logout doesn't work, we get a 404. We will deal with that shortly. Okay, so we can register, we can log in. We've got the appropriate logic in our navigation bar, even though our formatting is not quite right, to show or hide the links around register, login, and login. We're due for another pause. I'm going to push this stuff up to GitHub. Okay, so when we come back, we will build a really simple logout that when we click, it'll end our user session. It'll take us back to the login screen, and it will replace these links with the register and login links. And then the last thing we'll do is we want to secure access to the artist data. So a user must be logged in order to add, edit, or delete. The user is anonymous. They can see this page, but they will not see any of the links. We can do that using Passport relatively easily. Okay, are there any questions before we take a break? Okay, I've uploaded. We'll take a break here. We'll be back in 10.